Okay, let us hear from Lauren Renz, Paul Sawyer, and Anastasia Lambros. So because of the lateness of the hour, we are going to go to 2 minutes, but I promise you will get everything you have to say said. I promise.
Well, I can't say this in 2 minutes. I wrote it for 3.
Do your best.
Good evening. And I've been here since 2 o'clock. My name is Lauren Renz. I own and live in a brownstone on West 80th Street, built in 1892. After 35 years as an unpaid manager, I know what it takes to keep a small property going. And after hearing the politicians who represent the Upper West Side speak today, I feel like I should speak for owners on the Upper West Side. Operating and emergency expenses increase every year, whether due to steep property tax and water and sewer rate hikes, catastrophic damages caused by severe weather, such as we had this winter, or costly upgrades of our old homes required to meet a slew of new regulations. When it comes to affording these higher costs, I assure you, no one gives an owner a break because you have low-rent, regulated apartments. That's why I was stunned when this board voted in May to allow a possible rent freeze. Like every owner present at the hearing, I asked how it was possible for board members to vote for a freeze when the RGB's own study showed that in 2013, owners' operating costs rose 5.7%. Either the board does not believe its own research or it chooses to ignore the facts because it thinks that owners can afford to subsidize regulated tenants. We cannot and we should not. Whatever your reason was, I ask that before casting your final vote, you consider its effect on a small owner like me. Half of my 8 rental apartments are stabilized. 3 have rents under $850. You have my testimony, all of you. I depend on annual guideline increases to help meet higher costs for taxes, which rose 8% this year, but also for maintenance and emergency repairs. Since January, I incurred more than $50,000 in emergency, weather, and code-related costs paid for out of pocket and with a loan. I attached bills for the following: $21,000 to replace the boiler, which cracked during a January power outage, $21,450 to install a steel chimney lining and upgrade the boiler room to meet current building codes that weren't in effect for my last boiler, $3,700 to remove a large tree damaged by ice storms that was a safety threat, and $4,700 to repair ice-related leaks and cracks in masonry walls and the roof gutter, and to replace a stone walkway cracked by ice and snow. Stabilized rents of long-term tenants pay a decreasing share of my taxes and of costs to keep the building safe and in good repair. And to reduce the gap between rising costs and low rents, I urge you to reconsider and to vote for an increase of 4 to 5 to 6% or a minimum of $50, whichever is greater, for a 1-year lease, and 8 to 9% or a minimum of $80 for a 2-year lease.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Paul Sawyer.
Hi, good evening. My name is Paul Sawyer. I'm here to deliver testimony on behalf of Assemblyman Linda B. Rosenthal. I will try to speak very quickly. Good morning. I'm Assemblyman Linda B. Rosenthal, and I represent the 67th Assembly District, which includes the Upper West Side and parts of Clinton, Hell's Kitchen, and Manhattan. As a member of the New York State Assembly Committee on Housing and a longtime advocate for tenants' rights and affordable housing, I urge the Rent Guidelines Board to forego imposing any rent increases this year and to roll back the rents of rent-stabilized tenants. The RGB is currently considering increasing rents on 1-year leases by up to 3% and by up to 4.5% on 2-year leases. Last year, the board hiked rents 4% on 1-year and 7.75% on 2-year leases. While I am pleased that the RGB is also considering a rent freeze for 1-year leases and a 0.5% increase for 2-year leases, the countless unwarranted extortionary increases approved by RGB under the previous administration have threatened the economic and cultural diversity of the city. Tenants need and deserve a rollback of rents to help undo the damage already done to affordable housing in New York City. My district is home to nearly 44,000 rent-stabilized tenants, and this board's decision each year is the primary factor in whether or not my constituents, and nearly 2 million tenants statewide, will be able to remain in their homes. Many of these people are living on low fixed incomes like Social Security, which increased a paltry 1.5% this year, just half of the 3% increase these tenants may soon be facing. Too many rent-regulated tenants already devote more than 30% of their income toward paying rent, and many in my district have seen their rent-stabilized rents exceed their fixed incomes and are burning through savings in a desperate attempt to avoid homelessness. Throughout this process, those representing landlords have argued that rent increases are necessary to keep pace with rising fuel costs and that landlords depend upon the income generated from their buildings. For those who argue these increases are reasonable, one need only look at the exorbitant rents paid by chain stores, banks, and drugstores and storefronts and apartment buildings throughout the city. In addition, RGB also includes the cost of fuel in its rent calculations. Using a calculus that considers the shifting fuel prices and number of rooms in each building, 75% of the annual fuel cost per room is passed on to the tenant. What's more, the smaller landlords who serve as the public face of these arguments represent only a tiny fraction of an industry that is in actuality dominated by wealthy landlords and faceless corporations who control the vast majority of properties. Almost done? No. Okay, year after year, we're seeing landlords' profits skyrocketing even as their tenants are twisting themselves in knots, scrambling to pay all their bills. Ensuring that housing remains affordable for average families is also key to our economic recovery. A strong middle class...
Sir, can I interrupt one second?
Yep.
Do we have your written version of this
Yes.
testimony? Excellent.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great job.
Quick speaking, we're impressed. Anastasia Lambros.
Hello. Close
evening.
enough. It's Athanasia.
Anastasia, I'm sorry. Thank
No problem. At least you didn't say anesthesia or euthanasia, which I get every now and then.
Neither came to mind.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity for speaking here today and give you a landlord's perspective. My name is Athanasia Lambros. I am a landlord of a 5-story walk-up in Chelsea, 12 apartments, all of which are rent stabilized. Okay? One of the things that you should know is that I did inherit this from my dad, and for the tenants that are still here, I want you to understand that I have followed my father's legacy. I get along extremely well with my tenants, and we communicate constantly, and I'm one of the good landlords. I'm not one of the slum landlords. But I do want to explain that we've heard data today, so I'm going to give you my data. Okay, and what I thought I'd do is I'd pick calendar year 2011 to 2013, so that's 2 years. And I want to list for you that my insurance costs have gone up 15%, the taxes in that 2-year period over 8%, the utilities over 8%, the water and sewer over 8%. Now that's not to mention repairs, maintenance, and general upkeep. In that 2-year period, I realized a rent increase, the rents that I collect, of 1.5%. Now, one thing we need to understand, that I'm not the only nice landlord around. There are others. And we have a vested interest in our building, we have good relationships with our tenants, and we want to work together to find what's fair and equitable. But understand that these costs are making it so incredibly difficult to keep our buildings up to par, to keep our services the way each tenant deserves. And it's getting to the point where it's not going to be easy to do anymore. It's not easy now. Understand that we are right now at a time when there's a lot of development going on. Certainly in Chelsea, you know what's going on in Chelsea. Big developers are getting perks from the city. They're getting some tax breaks, but this is one thing I want the tenants specifically to hear. At best, these developers are given additional air rights, which means they could build their buildings higher, in exchange for offering a few apartments of what is not so affordable housing. In fact, one developer approaches...
I'm going to have to ask you to...
Okay, so understand, even one developer wanted those tenants to use a separate entrance into their developments, but that's neither here nor there. But understand that as these new developments go on, there'll be less and less affordable housing in the city. Landlords like myself have two options. Either it's going to get to the point where we abandon our buildings, or we sell to these developers. It's a lose-lose for everyone in this city, not to mention the lack of the diversity that we currently enjoy. Instead of making it difficult for me and to maintain my building, and making it easy for developers to develop and charge $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a month, I think you should do something to protect us. Protect the tenants, absolutely, but give us something. Give us something to support the tenants, to support our communities.
Thank you for your testimony. Lena Alvarez, and then Abraham Musafi.
Good afternoon, panel, Madam Chair, distinguished members. My name is Lino M. Alvarez, and I'm a longtime resident of the Upper West Side. I have an SRO tenancy going back to the 80s, a statutory tenancy, so I'm rent stabilized without a lease. I live in a small brownstone on West 68th Street. Before the current landlord bought the building in 2002, we were 100% rent stabilized, and there were 13 units. Today, there's only 10 units, and only 2 are rent stabilized. Everything else has gone market, and the SROs are long gone, with the exception of me. I'm the last of the Mohicans. My landlord cannot possibly need a rent increase when the revenue generated by the small brownstone has gone up from approximately $5,400 a month in 2002 to approximately $25,000 a month today. That is an increase of close to 450% every 30 days. Please do not reward over-the-top greed with more greed, especially in view of the hard economic times. According to the Pew Research Center, 4 able men and women out of 10 in this nation are not working. 4. Those are our brothers and sisters, the permanently unemployed, the homeless, the evicted, the challenged, whether they're disabled, in school, taking care of an elderly parent, my mother lives with me, or the arts. They're our brothers and sisters. From 2002 until today, my landlord's top line went up 450%. Property taxes did not go up 450%. Gas and electric did not go up 450%, and the water didn't. So I implore you to freeze the rents at minimum. And I want to ditto what Tim Collins said. And actually, let's have a rollback, because I used to pay $70 back in 1989 a week, and now I pay $123. And you know what? That's a 60% increase over 25 years. And I don't see the point of not having a rollback. We're in a Great Depression. If you want to quote what we're going through, that, I should know, my mother went through the Great Depression in the 30s, and the unemployment rate might be 33% right now. So please give the rent-stabilized tenants of this town a fair shake, and those that are hurting, and roll back the rents. Not just freeze the rent, roll back the rents.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you for listening, and congratulations on your appointment, Madam Chair.
Abraham Musafi. Abraham Musafi. Wei Sang Ing. Judith Siegel. Judith Siegel.
It's been a very long day, and I'm going to read this for my mother. She's tired. Okay. My name is Judith Siegel, and I'm an 84-year-old artist. Our house on Morton Street acquired us in 1957. I say acquired us because when you have an old house, you are its person. Back then, we could nearly afford the 1835 brownstone because it was dilapidated and vermin infested, but we could hardly imagine that the rent protections of World War II would last until 2014, 50 years later. Those renovations of our 5-story walk-up up took all our time and life savings. I also worked with other villagers to save Washington Square Park, improve our schools, and protect the village as an historic district finally passed a decade later. Today, the village has become the new Gold Coast with movie star neighbors as the old residents are squeezed out and pass on. But we are still here, along with our 4 longtime tenants. Morton Street is their home, but it's our home too. In the last decade, our property tax more than doubled from about $20,000 in 2002 to $43,000 today, yet our real estate taxes are assessed at full market rent for the space we occupy, though it is unrenovated. But our 4 rental apartments are strictly controlled at 1/2 to 1/3 below market. We have no market rents. That is barely enough. There was some editing here and I'm having trouble following this, I'm sorry. That is barely enough to cover the real estate tax, fuel, and water on that space alone. This is for one apartment that has a separate kitchen and an outdoor patio, and it's $900 a month. Meanwhile, our expenses are skyrocketing. Long-delayed major repairs include replacing the crumbling stucco back wall, decrepit 1920s gutters, decaying roof cornice, and windows. The bids are coming in starting at $100,000, and that's without the windows. Last week, we learned we must replace all the old gas pipes, which will cost $18,000. We had a leak, we were shut off last week, we're repairing it right now, it's an unforeseen expense. Under current major capital improvement rules, we will recoup less than half the cost of the repairs, with many expenses not allowed, including engineering fees and permits, not to mention the reams of paperwork that we have to pay for, and we must find the funds. Our senior tenants are protected by many layers of regulation, but I'm a senior citizen too. Who is protecting us? Who is protecting me? I've heard people say tough. They say we should not have bought this brownstone in 1957 and that we should move out, but it's our home. Where would we go? We've spent decades repairing a 180-year-old house with our own hands and hired specialists too. When we were young, my husband would come home from his job as a buyer in training at Bloomingdale's, change his clothes, and lay bricks and scrape paint until midnight. Though I'm a senior citizen, under the laws, I could lose my house for failure to pay taxes, but our tenants, whatever their income, can stay forever at very low rents. Please pass the increases of 6 to 9% for 1- and 2-year leases. Even this amount is far below our actual expenses. Please think of small senior citizen owners like us, too. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good job, Mom.
John Meat, then Joyce Holland. John Meat. Oh, thank you. Met.
I'm glad to be up here. I've been here since 1:30 like you guys. I'll be brief because most of what I wanted to say has been said. I'm a tenant, rent-subsidized tenant of a 1-bedroom apartment on the Upper East Side in a building that has 22 stories and 260 units. My rent in the last 2.5 years has increased by $300 a month, and I am now being priced out of my apartment. I have the same concerns that everyone just voiced about MCIs that go on forever and about the kinds of leases we've had. I've been in this apartment for almost 40 years. Recently where you couldn't take a 3rd year and the percentages went up to nearly 8%. Of course, I voiced those complaints too. And other things that haven't been mentioned, like it used to be a small room, less than 50 square feet, was not counted as one of the rooms towards determining your rent. Now, even if it has a small window, even a crack of a window, that is counted as a room and raises your rent. Now, recently, our mayor was chastised because his people were driving him around the city at speeds higher than they should have been. And I was thinking, when this one gentleman who got up and talked about Mayor de Blasio's apartment, I think somewhere in Brooklyn, I'm not sure, where he is not abiding in what he has recommended for landlords to do. I couldn't believe what he said. Did he think that because the mayor, who was supposed to be the champion of that sort of approach, because he's not abiding in it, the rest of us should just forget it and let the landlords ride roughshod over us? We didn't forget the traffic laws just because his driver rode around the city. Anyways, I'm getting beyond myself, and I don't want to go on. I know your time is limited. In my building, every one of the leases guaranteed electricity paid for by the landlord. The law changed. All of our leases were violated, and through an MCI, which was questionable, we now not only pay our electric from all of our leases, though all of our leases were violated, but we have to pay the huge cost of putting in the meters and the wiring so that we can free the landlord of the responsibility he had from leases that we had.
Sir, if you have specific complaints about the building, the DHCR is the entity to go to.
We complained to them, they denied it. It was a rubber stamp denial. Anyway, let me just finish. I don't want to go on with this. I have something that I feel is very important that I want to say, and now that I'm retired, I'm a performer. I need to see the audience sometime. New York has been good to me in some ways, and I appreciate that. I came here as a 22-year-old college graduate.
Sir, I'm sorry.
Give me 15 seconds for Christ's sake.
15 seconds.
I came here as a 22-year-old college graduate. I got a job. I got retired after 30 years working for the state. And I even brought my mother here to live with me. New York's amenities made it possible. She was disabled. I would like to give back, but I need somebody to help me stay in the area where I live. And thank you very much for that.
Thank you for your testimony. Joyce Holland, then Glenn Richter, and then Alan Fierstein. Tenants 18.
Good evening. My name is Joyce Holland, and I am a property manager in this great city. Lived here my entire life, and glad to know that I've enjoyed a lot here. In any case, I didn't plan to speak today, but after hearing so much testimony from other owners and tenants and politicians, I felt compelled. I immediately thought of 3 different stories that I have been exposed to as a result of being a property manager. First, there was a tenant who cost that one apartment upwards of $55,000. This was as a result of non-payment of rent of $27,000, approximately $10,000 in legal court fees, and in the rest in trying to upgrade the apartment after he left, which was left as a disaster. What was the other astonishing thing about this, when he decided not to pay rent, going back and forth to court, he bought and parked in front of the house a black-on-black Mercedes-Benz. Okay, that's my first story. The second story is another tenant who, for reasons unknown, continuously has leaks in his apartment, doesn't allow me in to inspect the apartment, and then tries to blame it on the building. Then there's a third tenant who, in fact, does a great many things very similar. These are the things that we are exposed to. This is our daily lives, and these are the things that are not part of the cost that we have to absorb. So I just wanted to alert you to these things. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Glenn Richter, Alan Fierstein, and then Baxter Thomas Bay.
Good afternoon, or by now, good evening. My name is Glenn Richter. My wife and I have lived in the same building on West 97th Street in Manhattan for 42 years. It's now a rent-stabilized building. Before I retired 4 years ago, I walked every weekday for almost 18 years, 2 blocks up Columbus Avenue to the New York City Housing Authority Douglas Houses project where I worked. Simply by crossing the street, I moved from a world of mostly middle-class renters to a very different world of low-income tenants. Today, things are different. 5 new market-rate apartment towers line those 2 blocks on Columbus and Amsterdam Avenue. My apartment building and several others nearby left the Mitchell-Lama program and became rent-stabilized. New tenants in all the rent-stabilized buildings pay near or market rates. Offered usually 1-year leases, many of them are in revolving doors. Here 1 year, gone the next. The landlords recoup their relatively modest expenses to rehab the ex-stabilized apartments within a few months, and it's pretty much gravy from there on out. If not for the rent stabilization, our neighborhood would transition to one in which only the rich can afford, and the low income stays only by the grace of the New York City Housing Authority. We would lose the diversity which is the strength of New York City. Many of us senior citizens in our building are retired New York City employees. We worked hard for modest salaries. I worked for NYCHA, where I felt I could make a difference for the better. My wife was a New York City school teacher for 35 years, the majority of them by her own request in the South Bronx, where she also felt she could make a difference. Since we've been here for a long time and hope to be here for a long time further, we show our appreciation for our neighborhood by volunteering extensively to make it a better place. We see also other long-term tenants volunteering. We help our neighborhood retain its stability. Rent increases for rent-stabilized tenants also need to be reasonable to keep middle-class tenants in the neighborhood. In our building of 246 apartments, for example, about 50 have become market rents so far.
Mr. Richter,
I've been waiting for 5 hours to speak.
Sir.
Give me 20 more seconds. Thank you very much for your time. In our building of 246 apartments, for example, about 50 have become market rate so far, which I'd estimate is 5 times the average rent-stabilized rate. That means that our landlord is in effect more than doubling the his rent income without an increase in the number of apartments he has to service. All over the city, there's a constant reduction of rent-stabilized tenants and increase of market-rate tenants with very little apartment vacancy. This should more than compensate landlords for the increased expenses. As such, I'd urge the RPG to vote for no rent increase. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and for your patience. Mr. Fierstein, Baxter Thomas Bay, and then Edward Maloney.
Hello, I own a 5-story loft building. Half of my building is occupied by 3 residential apartments. Each one is a full floor, 2,000 square foot loft. The prior owner put the residents in there. I built my recording studio in there in 1974. When my lease was up, I had to buy the building in order to prevent having to move a recording studio, which is not an easy thing to do. This was before the loft law was passed. I have no desire to rent these spaces residentially. I didn't put the tenants in there. But ridiculously low rents are a problem that not only affects me, but affects the city as well. Each loft of the 3 lofts in my building that are residential could be housing businesses. That would be giving jobs to probably 10 people per loft. But instead, they're occupied by people who own houses elsewhere, one through an inheritance. One bought a country house recently, upstate, where he goes every weekend. He pays $1,128 per month. The average stabilized rent, I looked it up today, in the Bronx 3 years ago was $1,066. He pays about the same amount for a 2,000 square foot loft in Soho. I have one commercial full floor loft that I rent out as one of my previous studios. I charge a fair rent for it. My tenants never move out because my rent is too high. Since 2008, my real estate taxes have gone from $32,000 to $85,000. That's an increase of 265% from 2008. There are no real estate tax escalators in my lease with my commercial or residential tenants. Low rents encourage the tenants to stay forever, preventing what would be probably 30 jobs. Lofts are a separate category from most of what you're dealing with and heard about today, and they typically get lower increases than all other buildings. I've been subsidizing the building for the last 25 years. Please remember that in my case, these loft tenants are getting huge spaces, incredibly low rent that do not cover my costs, and it prevents new jobs. It's wrong. I think you have the ability to see that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Baxter Thomas Bay, Edward Maloney, and Daniel Servini. Okay. Oh, nope. Maloney? Excellent.
Good afternoon or good evening. My name is Edward Maloney. I'm co-chair of the Tenant Association of 215 East 80th Street, and I'm a retired living on a fixed income. I'm a stabilized tenant in a condo converted building, one of a dozen large rental properties that my landlord has converted, who has many more properties waiting conversion. This board and the system has been rewarding greed over stability and fairness for a long time. My landlord has opted out of affordable housing and is converting and selling apartments. He makes cosmetic repairs, fixes some violations, and spruces up his building to promote condo sales and gets rewarded with an 18% MCI increase. That's on top of the annual amounts that this board sets. Despite 18 specific code and legal regulations that say his work should not have qualified for an MCI, but the regulatory DHCR has been co-opted and captured by the industry, and it is supposed to regulate it, but instead it routinely rubber stamps landlord MCI applications for rent hikes. To add insult to injury, the DHCR has not decided on our appeal for over 3.5 years, yet we have to pay the 18% in the meantime, and we pay it forever. The condo owners, our neighbors, only pay it once. So at a meeting of the Tenants and Neighbors Coalition, 41 of the 42 buildings represented had large MCI increases. Please take this giant loophole that raises rents into consideration. I have a second shorter point, which is every year when I come here, I see and speak before you, I see the real estate industry letting the small landlords do all the talking as poster children. It's the same as when the multinational agri companies go before Congress and want supports. They drag out mom and pop farmers, but who reaps the benefits? It's the enormous owners. As a tenant, I say, please help the small landlords. Let them open their books on a case-by-case and prove their need for hardship, and let them have their 6% increase. I'm about to finish, but please stop handing the larger New York landlords windfall after windfall, like my landlord. The larger landlords with many buildings and thousands of apartments are making money hand over fist. Please keep that in mind.
Thank you for your testimony and your patience.
Thank you.
Daniel Servini? Great.
How you doing?
And then we'll have Kayla Rivera, Sarah Diaz, and Susan McGittigan.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Cervini, and I've been a resident of an SRO unit at 212 West 91st Street in Manhattan since August 2003. I believe it is necessary that the cost of rent be held at its present amount. While I'm a resident of an SRO, my reasons could easily be applied to all rent-stabilized units in New York City. New York City has not fully recovered from the recession. Everyone was affected by the profound economic decline that started in the fall of 2008. However, while some people's net worth may have plummeted on paper when the Dow Jones Industrial Average sank, some people lost their apartments and other basic necessities of living. And obviously on the rebound, it is harder for those who have lost or are in danger of losing their basic necessities to recover financially than those who have lost money on their balance sheet or whose profits simply declined. Based upon the latest data available from the New York...
Sir, can I ask you to just move a little bit back?
No problem. Yes, Madam Chairman. Based upon the latest data available from the New York State Department of Labor website, the average New York City unemployment rate has averaged 8.1% for this year, being 2014. This is on pace to be a noticeable improvement from 8.7%. That was the average New York City unemployment rate for 2013. However, it has to be kept in mind that New York City's annual average unemployment rate was consistently above 9% for 2012, 2011, 2010, and 2009. I myself was unemployed for a considerable amount of time despite proactively and aggressively searching for work. I have a bachelor's degree from a state school, a number of years of work experience, volunteer experience at nonprofits, and very sound references. In order to keep my modest apartment, I depleted my savings, went into debt, and took whatever work came my way. These sporadic jobs allowed me to squeak by, but I, along with a number of friends and acquaintances, frequently found ourselves underemployed and jumping from temporary position to temporary position. That scenario obviously made it extremely difficult to reestablish and maintain personal financial stability. I am very happy and grateful that I am currently working full-time 45 hours a week in my field, but I still have a good degree of time to make up financially. I still have a number of debts to repay before I can reestablish any type of financial safety net that would allow me to pay my monthly rent. If I have to go see a doctor for whatever reason, as every human planet has to do now and then, I'm very fortunate to have health insurance that fall far short of the massive annual deductible, in addition to the substantial monthly premiums I am required to pay before my coverage starts. I strongly advocate that rents not be increased. Thank you for listening to my testimony.
Thank you so much. Go on.
Good evening, Chairwoman and members of the board. My name is Kayla Rivera, and I'm a tenant organizer at Goddard Riverside SRO Law Project. It is a great honor, thank you, to have the opportunity to speak to you this evening concerning issues affecting tenants in single-room occupancies or SROs in residential hotels. I would like to take this time to thank the board for voting on a 0% increase at the preliminary vote. We can only hope that your vote remains the same for the final vote. The SRO Law Project is comprised of attorneys and tenant organizers and has provided free legal representation, organizing support, and advocacy to SRO tenants living on the west side of Manhattan for over 30 years. Many of the people that we serve are living at or below the poverty line, which New York State Department of Health measures as a yearly income of $21,590 or $1,800 a month. Our work ensures that the low-income populations we serve have housing stability and are empowered to protect their rights as tenants and viable members of the New York City economic community. I'd like to remind the board that the reason why we're here before you is because New York City is suffering a housing emergency. The state of New York City's affordable housing is dismal, to say the least. Most low-income and working-class New Yorkers cannot afford to live in this city. As the cost of living has risen, the income index has not. While many landlords continue to find ways to increase their revenue, New Yorkers are being pushed out of their homes. Over the years, the affordable housing stock has plummeted. A major problem has been that rent-stabilized units are being taken off the market and converted into illegal hotels. It is unjust for us to just sit back and allow this to continue happening. I've done advocacy work in many SRO buildings that have been converted into illegal hotels. I've worked alongside tenants in the Imperial Court on West 79th Street, Hotel 309 on West 14th Street, and Harlem Bed and Breakfast on West 120th Street, which are all illegal. and have helped to combat the greed and vagrant abuse of power that these landlords exhibit. Websites like Airbnb serve as a platform for these illegal hotels. Advertising SRO rooms as hostels for affordable prices, landlords stand to make double or even triple the regulated rent of an SRO that's been converted into a legal hotel room.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up, Mr. Rivera.
For example, I've been working with various tenants living in the Imperial Court on West 79th Street. Many of these tenants pay $500 or less in monthly rent. After a few illegal conversions, cosmetic improvements to the reception area and warehousing apartments, the landlords were able to turn SRO buildings into viable transient hotel operations. TripAdvisor.com.
Mr. Rivera, you got it. We have so many people to go, and we want to respect everyone's time.
10 more seconds. TripAdvisor.com, a well-known traveling website, quotes a single room in this hotel at $110 a night. One tourist renting a room for 4 nights amounts to the single SRO tenant would pay in a month. All we ask is that you can't allow landlords to continue to get richer while we strive for the prosperity of our tenants. Thank you.
Sarah Diaz. Sarah Diaz. Sarah Diaz. Alvin Doyle.
Hello, my name is Alvin Doyle, and I live in Stuyvesant Town. In the interest of time, I'll start from the bottom. Okay.
We appreciate that.
Okay. There's 2 issues that I want to raise. One issue is rent regulations and the local economy. A recent ad campaign claims that a rent freeze will hurt the city because landlords will not be able to pay more taxes to government. While it is true that a portion of rent increases go to municipal tax collectors, every dollar that goes from the tenant to the landlord is a dollar that the tenant will not be able to spend in the local economy or place in a savings account. Local businesses experience the loss of income, and sales taxes and other local tax revenues suffer as a result of the loss of consumer spending in the community. Local businesses pay taxes. Local businesses provide jobs for people, and those business employees pay taxes as well. To assume that a transfer of money from the tenants to the owners will increase the overall wealth of the city is not supported by fact. Another issue I would like to raise is housing construction. A widely held myth is that New York City witnessed higher levels of housing construction during periods without rent regulations. However, the biggest surges in housing construction came between 1921 to 1928, when 665,000 units were constructed, and between 1947 to 1965, when 676,000 units were constructed. In the late 60s, a change in the zoning laws, not rent regulation, caused a decline in new construction. With the right circumstances, new housing can and must be built, even when rents are regulated. And I have 5 seconds left, so I'll end it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I just want to thank you, Al, for all you've done for tenants in this city. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Delcinia Glovin, Maya Curlin, and Joyce Goodman. You know, Ms. You are actually not the last person who registered. You accidentally got in this other pile. This person arrived at 2:08, so thank you so much for being understanding of pile challenges.
Good evening, Madam Chairperson. Some of you may know me from Tenants and Neighbors, but I'm here as a rent-stabilized tenant this evening. I live in a rent-stabilized apartment in Harlem, where I've lived for 33 years. When I moved into my apartment in 1981, my rent was $428 a month. My salary was about $22,000 a year. I could not really afford it then, but making the assumption that salary increases would soon make it easier, I took the apartment. My last lease raised my rent to $1,150 a month, an increase of more than 300% since I moved in, while my salary has not nearly kept pace. After losing a job during the recession and still not having recovered from that, My rent over the past year and a half until very, very recently has actually exceeded my income. I am not the only person in this situation in my neighborhood and across New York City. Most of my neighbors are just like me. A lot of people who have not recovered from the recession, while the price to rent an apartment in New York City has gone through the roof in a short period of time. At a recent New York City rent guidelines hearing that I attended, the DHCR, while giving an overview of rent increases in rent-stabilized units across the city, gave testimony that in Upper Manhattan and the Bronx, rents are escalating at a faster pace than anywhere else in the city. I am sure you have the statistics. What do you think that is, and what do you think is the result? Let me tell you what's happening in Harlem, Washington Heights, and other neighborhoods with populations primarily populated by people of color. When a long-term rent-stabilized tenant dies or retires or otherwise leaves an apartment, the landlord immediately gets a vacancy bonus of 20%. Then they gut and renovate the apartment because they can. They raise the rent 1/60th of the cost of renovation, or so they claim, because they can. They raise the rent a couple of $100s, and then from something like $800 to $1,500. Then they give the tenants a preferential rent because they can. Then at the end of the lease, they raise the rent a couple more $100s because they can. And when the tenant vacates the apartment because they cannot pay the new ridiculous rent, the landlord gets another vacancy bonus, does minimal renovations, and then get another hike based on 1/60th% of that, and that goes on and on. So in the space of 1 year, an apartment can double, the rent on an apartment can double.
Ms. Cloven?
So there's a gold rush happening in Harlem, there's a gold rush happening in Washington Heights. I ask you, I implore you to roll back the rents, if not a 0% increase, because that is the only thing that is acceptable.
Thank you for your testimony. Maya Kurian, Joyce Goodman, Susan Gammy. Maya Kurian. Joyce, come on up, Joyce.
Hello, good evening. I'm speaking on behalf of Assembly Member Daniel O'Donnell. He's an Assembly member of the 69th District, representing residents of Manhattan Valley, Morningside Heights, and portions of the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I'm here today to call for a rent freeze. Any rent increase at all is too much. The proposed rent increases of up to 3% for one-year lease renewals and between 0.5 and 4.5% for two-year lease renewals, if passed, will be an economic burden to thousands of families and individual renters who reside in my district and throughout the city at large. Excuse me. The main purpose of rent regulation is to protect tenants during an emergency housing shortage from rent increases that would constitute a hardship. The function of the Rent Guidelines Board when authorizing rent increases every year is to strike a balance between maintaining affordable housing for tenants while allowing landlords to maintain services and make a reasonable profit. For too long, however, the city has failed to grasp who our renters are and what incomes they have. The result is that more families are finding it increasingly difficult to afford their rents. Once forced out of their apartments, there are fewer and fewer affordable housing options for low and middle income New Yorkers. In my community office, the crisis comes to life on a regular basis. We see many forced to choose between paying the rent and paying for other necessities. This was the case for a 60-year-old constituent who fell behind in her rent after paying for basic dental care. We see those who are chronically late in paying their rent because they have no savings and rely on the arrival of their Social Security check before paying the rent. We see those living on unemployment insurance needing to partition their one-bedroom apartments to make space for roommates in order to pay the rent. We see many families with children unable to find housing anywhere after living in a shelter for a year or more.
Is it possible to share the written testimony with us?
Yeah, I have copies. I have copies for everybody.
That would be wonderful, so we can hear.
So you can wrap it, I can wrap it up, right?
That would be great.
I'm here to wrap it up. Should I say a little bit more?
One sentence, how about that?
The reality is it doesn't have to be this way. It can be a rent freeze, that's what he wants. That's what we're calling for now.
Sui Zhang.
Hi, my name is Yi. I work for CAB, Organizing Asian Community.
I'm sorry, I'm not
Yeah, I'm actually speaking on behalf of Sui Jen because she had to leave. She's 87 and she, is that okay? I'm just reading her testimony.
Okay, if we actually have other people who are ahead. I think the note I got was she was at 87 and had to leave, but I unfortunately got it
Oh, okay,
before she
that's
left.
fine.
So
I can wait until her.
thanks so much, I appreciate it. Susan Gammy, Sarah Whitman, James Walker.
Hi, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Susan. I, along with my husband and son, live in a rent-stabilized apartment in Greenwich Village that I first moved into in 1978 when artists could still afford to live in a neighborhood famous for being hospitable to artists. I serve on community board too. I'm a member of my block association and a member of Tenants and Neighbors. I'm also a member of that increasingly endangered species known as native New Yorker. I'm here today to ask you to support a rent freeze as a measure to balance out the trends of the past several years. My peer group of artists, writers, and teachers has been required to accept the hard fact that the current financial reality necessitates wage freezes, decreases, unpaid leave, and other severe cost-cutting measures on the part of the cultural sector institutions that employ us. The schools, theaters, museums, studios, and art institutions that we work for have all been struggling to keep their heads above water during these tough economic times, and there have been negative consequences for all. There's a very different reality in the real estate sector of the city, where these same years have seen a continued healthy appreciation in the value of New York real estate, steady increases in the rents on regulated and non-regulated apartments, and an increase in owners' NOI over the past 8 years. The robust health of the real estate industry, in sharp contrast to the harsher recession reality of most New York regulated tenants, makes a compelling case for a freeze this year. As you know, the annual rent increase is not the only legal means of raising rents on regulated apartments. There are MCIs, vacancy bonuses, and IAIs, all of which are often used manipulatively and unscrupulously. As you deliberate, I ask you to factor in one more thing. There's an increasing trend on the part of building managers to aggressively neglect basic property maintenance in regulated units. Leaking roofs, rodent infestations, burst pipes, lack of dependable heat and hot water. These are all routine problems in regulated housing where often small matters are ignored until they explode into larger MCI-able problems. Rewarding this chronic neglect with a guaranteed, entitled annual rent increase has served as a disincentive for many to take and owners to take responsibility. Our mayor was elected by a mandate on his Tale of Two Cities platform. A decision to freeze rents this year would not only have a huge positive impact on the lives of millions of New Yorkers, it would serve as an important gesture in unifying those two cities as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Sarah Whitman, James Walker.
Hi, I have some written testimony I can give you, but just to highlight. My name is Sarah Whittam. I'm a resident of Stuyvesant Town, Peter Cooper Village, where I've lived in a rent-stabilized apartment and raised my family since 1990. I am also a New York City municipal employee. I live in a complex where approximately 11,500 apartments, over half of which have been effectively lost as affordable housing in the last decade because of aggressive deregulation strategies employed by the owners, resulting in rents of an average of $4,000 to $6,000 per month. My daughter is employed in a good middle-class job. She's very lucky to have this job, but she pays 45% of her take-home pay each month in rent, living in a formerly rent-regulated apartment with 2 roommates. She has no hope of being able to afford an apartment of her own. Furthermore, her rent-to-income burden means she has to make difficult trade-offs that affect her future. Does she save for retirement when a little money put away now has a bigger impact later in life? Or does she pay her school loans? Or does she save for a cushion against layoffs? She's in the arts, after all. What would you advise her to do? I recently learned of city workers who come to work every day but are near homelessness. These are people with reasonably decent jobs and benefits but can't find an affordable place to live, and they don't qualify for low-income housing opportunities. The affordable housing issue is up close and personal for all of us, even if you don't personally feel the strain. How about that healthcare worker who takes care of your elderly mother? Or that daycare provider who takes care of your children? Or that custodian who takes care of your building? Or that secretary that sends out the landlord's rent bills? Or the staff who takes care of you at the Rent Guidelines Board? How can you help stem the loss of affordable housing when you don't have purview over all the laws? Here's how. I urge you to freeze rent increases at 0% for the next few years, to give time for the de Blasio administration and others to work with state legislators to overhaul the existing legislation to more effectively preserve and protect what is left of our affordable rent-regulated housing stock. Thank you for your time.
James Walker, Dave Subran, Cynthia Chaffee.
I'm James Walker. I also live in Stuyvesant Town, retired. This is the ground zero of affordable housing for New York City. That is, New York City has been stripped of its control over the rent stock. Those upstate legislatures, it's an issue that they can easily sell us out. So this board is the only real control of affordable housing. So I ask you to make the right decision. And in Stuyvesant Town, we've been hit with one MCI after another. There is nothing that hasn't been replaced that won't be replaced again. It didn't need to be, in some instances, it didn't need to be replaced, but that didn't matter. All that mattered was to get that MCI in. And when a apartment in Stuyvesant Town, when a rent-stabilized apartment becomes available or is given up, it will never be in the stock again. That is, that organization will do everything to turn it over, flip it, put horrendous money into converting that apartment so to put it over the $2,500. So again, this board, as I see it, is the only effective means that our mayor has to implement his policy of affordability and sustainability in this city. And I echo what the former presenter said. You know, it makes sense for us to maintain a accessible city for everyone. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Subran. I want to publicly protest the fact that we had 1 minute cut, so I have to give a sort of truncated presentation. As a trained superintendent of maintenance mechanic specializing in energy conservation and weatherization, I have some advice for small landlords. There's a lot of waste in the building. You keep saying about fuel consumption and water. Some of the things I suggest would be that you hire an energy efficiency specialist and conduct a combustion efficiency test, so this way you could save as much as 40% on your fuel. The city should incentivize these landlords, small landlords, to get this energy audit by giving them a one-time rebate, not an MCI, for this audit, and with the future savings that should ease operating maintenance expenses to them. Some technical advice. Install a permanent stack thermometer. High stack temperatures are an indicator of inefficient combustion, resulting in heating and fuel waste. Install a makeup water meter. This indicates if water level is stable in the boiler, and a lot of water makeup is needed, which means that steam or hot water is leaking somewhere, resulting in high water and heating bills. For water savings in medium and large apartments, install a circulating pump, ensures quick hot water and demand at the faucets instead of having run cold water for 15 to 25 minutes before it gets hot. Uninsulated steam systems result in energy waste because they heat up generally unoccupied spaces and do not direct the energy to the intended end use. You do not want the heat for rats and roaches. You want the heat for tenants. Tighten the envelope in the building by sealing and insulating all windows and doors in the building. And then also, we should repeal the 1971 Ulster law that denies New York City any state savings in rent regulation. That's regulation without representation. Real quick. Also, let's look at Westchester and Nassau counties where the RGBs do not use a price index system and have managed to actually freeze rents several times, while the city board has never done so. Instead, they require landlords to file an income and earning numbers every year with the state DHCR. Also this spring, they will be given income and earning data for 2013. One quick. In contrast, the city RGB gets income and earning data from the Department of Finance that's over a year out of date. This year's report will be based on data from 2012, not 2013. But there is no reason that the department cannot, if with the political will of the mayor, make more current data available like Westchester and Nassau County, so this way we can have a rent freeze in our city. We should unfreeze Section 8 vouchers for qualified senior citizens, and homeless people can once again be brought back into the loop for affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.